Welcome to Real Estate for Beginners. I'm Gershon Levy. Now we're going to finally jump into the escrow period and talk about what needs to happen for a buyer to become an owner and for the seller to get their money from the deal. Please remember though that I'm based in Las Vegas, Nevada, so I'm talking about how we deal with it here. It could vary by state. So what exactly happens during the escrow period when someone's trying to buy a home? Well, up until now, we've been working towards actually making escrow happen. The buyers decided they want to buy a home. They got pre-approved for a loan, they toured properties, and they made offers. The seller decided they wanted to sell their home, so they listed it on the market. They had people come and tour the property, they received offers, and then they started negotiating back and forth with one of the buyers, which led to a purchase agreement. That purchase agreement, that contract, will inform kind of the rules and process that's going to happen during this escrow period, with a final goal being that the buyer will become the owner of the home and the seller will get their money for the property. So we're going to talk about the four main characters of the escrow process, which is the buyer, the seller, the lender, and the title company. And we're going to discuss briefly what their main roles and responsibilities are. Afterwards, we're going to kind of take all of this and put it onto a timeline so we can understand it better looking at the order of operations. Okay, so first we have the buyer. One of the buyer's first responsibilities is to put down a deposit on the property, right? They're going to put down what's called an earnest money deposit. And that deposit generally is about, let's say, 1 to 2% of the total value of the home. So if you're buying a property that's $500,000, you can expect the earnest money deposit to be roughly, let's say, $5,000 to $10,000. And that deposit is going to be held by the title company in the escrow account. So the buyer should be wiring that deposit over, and we will put down to title so we don't forget where it goes. The second important thing during escrow is going to be the buyer ordering what's called a home inspection. A home inspector will come, basically pop the hood of the house, and look at the quality and condition of all the different features of the home, the appliances, the electrical, the heating and cooling, everything. And then they're going to give a physical report to the actual buyer so they can figure out, hey, do I want this property? Is it either too far gone or, hey, this is great, I love the condition of this home, let's continue. A majority of buyers will ask sellers to repair specific things that they find in the home inspection report. And that itself is actually a negotiation between the buyer and the seller, which we'll cover a little bit when we talk about the seller's responsibility of the repairs. The third thing is the buyer is going to work with the lender throughout the life of this deal. When I say life, I mean the average escrow period is, let's say, 30 days, and an average loan takes between 20 and 25 days to get approved. So the buyer is consistently working with the lender, submitting docs, turning in paperwork on time, and doing everything that the lender says they should do and not to do. Meaning, if the lender says, hey, don't open any new accounts on your credit, don't take on any new debt, don't buy a car, you've got to make sure as a buyer you are listening, because it's very easy to get disqualified for a loan during that escrow period if you're not listening to your lender. The fourth thing is the final walkthrough. About a day or two before the final day of the contract, before the close of escrow, a buyer will walk through the property and make sure it's of acceptable condition for them to move into, making sure it's clean, that the sellers remove their items. And if they had any repairs done by the seller during the escrow period, that's the time for the buyer to make sure the repairs are done correctly. Now let's look at the seller. One of the first things the seller is going to do during escrow is provide a form to the buyer that will explain any of the issues that the buyer encountered with the home while they owned the home. Nothing from before, but only from the time in which they owned the home. And that form is called an SRPD, or a seller's real property disclosure. And the idea here is to basically let the buyer know, has there been water damage? Has there been mold? Has there been problems with specific appliances? That way the buyer kind of knows exactly what they're buying and how those problems have been dealt with by the seller in the past. The second thing is repairs. We talked about the home inspection with the buyer, right? They're going to get an inspector to come out and pop the hood and look at everything. And once they get the report back from the home inspector, the buyer will say, hey, I need the air conditioning unit to be fixed if possible. I need the garbage disposal to be repaired. I need these leaks to be fixed, right? They'll ask for specific things. Not all of the things, because most sellers will not agree to everything found in a home inspection report, but most buyers will ask for the major things, and they will negotiate between themselves back and forth. Now, the seller doesn't have to just offer to do the repairs. They can also offer, in lieu of repairs, money back in the deal to the buyer. So we'll put over here, or, and then we'll put some dollar signs to denote that. But what'll happen is, let's say there's 10 things the buyer wants fixed. The seller can say, hey, I don't have the time to fix these things right now. How about I offer you $1,000 towards your closing costs and you fix them when you buy the house? And that's a very common occurrence in most deals. The third thing is the HOA documents. The seller has to order those HOA docs during escrow, so the buyer has time to review the rules and regulations of each HOA. Each HOA has different types of rules when it comes to paint, dogs, trash, all these things that you want to know before you're moving into a neighborhood. So it's important that the seller orders these in a timely fashion so the buyer has a chance to make sure they're good with how it is to live there. The fourth thing is prepping for the home for the walkthrough. Now, if the buyer is going to do a final walkthrough at the end of escrow, right, a day or two before the close, the seller has to prepare for that by removing their items, fixing any repairs, right, that they discussed, and keeping the property broom swept clean at the end so the buyer is taking possession of a clean home. All right, now let's move on to the other side, the lender and the title company. So the lender's main job is the loan. That's really what they're focused on. So right at the beginning, they're going to have the buyer do a mortgage application. Okay, that's a full app, because before they were just doing a pre-approval. Now it's a full mortgage application. Within 3 days, they're going to provide to the buyer what's called a loan estimate, which is going to explain all the different fees and parts of the loan to the buyer. So they have a full understanding of what it is exactly they're going to be paying for every month and over the life of them actually owning this property. Right? This is a very, very important form, and it's really become popular since the last recession. We wanted to make sure that buyers knew exactly what kind of financial burden they were taking on. The third thing is the appraisal. Now, the buyer is paying for this appraisal, but it's ordered by the lender. So let me put down buyer pays so we remember that. And remember, the reason for the appraisal is the lender is not going to loan the buyer more money than the house is worth, right? They want to make sure that whatever they're loaning out on, that the property is at least worth that. On the off chance that the buyer defaults, right, and the lender has to take the property back over, they don't want to take a property back over where they lended out more money than it's worth. That would make them upside down, and that's not their business. So they're going to do an appraisal and make sure the property is what they think it's worth. The final thing is the loan approval. After working for 20-25 days, getting all the documents in, right, the buyer should be able to obtain loan approval from the lender. And what the lender will do once they have this loan approval is then get the loan documents that will be sent to the title company for the buyer to sign on the last day or so of the actual deal. And once they sign those documents, the loan can be funded and the seller can get their money. And then finally, we have the title company, right? They have numerous jobs that are very important. One of the first is the title report. The title company wants to make sure that the seller has the right to sell this home and that they're the actual owner of the property. That's one of the things they're obsessed with. They don't want a situation where somebody comes in later and says, hey, that wasn't that guy's house to sell, and you guys insured the deal. So they're going to do a title report and make sure that the seller is allowed to sell the property and he's the owner or she's the owner. Second thing they do is issue title insurance, and specifically, right, mandatory is to those that are taking out a loan. We spoke before when we were talking about the idea of title and the idea of ownership about a lender's policy. And I'm going to put that one down because there is another type called an owner's policy, but Owner's policies are optional, right? Lenders you have to get if you're taking a loan. Let me put that down, lender's policy. And the idea of a lender's policy when you're a buyer and you're paying for title insurance is that, let's say you buy a property and then a year later someone comes and says, hey, that was my house, right? This guy sold it to you. He should not have been allowed to. That was illegal. It was my property. You should not be living there. And that person takes you to court and the court says, yeah, that's their property. You have to leave. It's their home. Well, what do? You lost your house and you still have a mortgage on that property. In that case, your title insurance lender's policy will come in and pay that mortgage off, since it's not your fault that the title search and the title company couldn't figure out that you weren't supposed to be able to buy that property. So very important. The third thing is the escrow account, which we talked about when we talked about the buyer's deposit. The title company will manage this account, and it's called the escrow account where that deposit is held. The fourth thing is the settlement statement, and this is a very important one, the settlement statement. This is the official ledger of credits and debits towards the end of the deal, right? And each side will receive the settlement statement showing exactly how much the buyer has to bring to the table to complete the deal, aside from their loan, right? How much money do they need to bring, their down payment, any of the fees or taxes they need to pay for. And then on the other side, the seller, it's going to figure out exactly after all the fees and things are paid, how much is the seller netting, right? Once they pay off their mortgage, once they pay all the fees, how much are they getting total back from the deal? So this will explain that at the end, the settlement statement. They call it the final settlement. And then we have the job of recording and disbursement. So the title company, the last day of the deal, once all the paperwork has been signed and everyone's good to go, one of their main jobs is making sure that the buyer now officially becomes the owner of the property. And what they're going to help the buyer do is help them record their deed with the county. So it's official record that the buyer is now the new owner. Once they have confirmation that that deed has been recorded by the county, the title company can then do the disbursement, which is basically everyone getting their money. The seller, the agents, anybody else that needs to be paid out from escrow. So that's a good breakdown of the main roles and responsibilities of each of these people. Now let's look at it on a timeline to see how this all unfolds. The series is not quite over yet, so make sure you watch the next video, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Have a great day, and thanks so much.